For failing to kiss the hand of King Charles II, the face of a nobleman's son is disfigured into a permanent grin, beginning a life of mental anguish as a circus freak in the 1928 silent film, The Man Who Laughs. And that's the movie we're dusting off this week on Movie Bones. Welcome to Movie Bones. Usually this is the part of the episode where you hear some kind of an intro from the movie, but we're doing a silent movie this week, so there's nothing to grab. So anyway, yeah, this week's film is The Man Who Laughs. It's a 1928 film starring Conrad Veidt as Gwenelplaine. You see him first as a child whose father has been kind of accused of disloyalty to the crown because he wouldn't, kiss the hand of the king. He had some disagreements there. But this grave sin is enough to not only kill the father, but to abduct the child and have him mutilated by what's called a group of people known as comprachicos. I'm going to dive on that word. I'm just going to bail on that, but these people, they take kids and they disfigure them for the novelty of it. That's the idea. I guess as good a place to start as any, because that's such an alien idea to modern audiences. And even back then, I think it was a myth and a bit of folklore than anything else. That was the way people, I guess, figured out how these people must be made, because they certainly couldn't just be born that way, apparently. So they had to come up with an explanation for it. And so you've got Gwenelplaine, who's got this permanent grin. He's taken in and he finds this girl whose mother has died of exposure in the cold. And he takes it upon himself, even at a young age, to take care of this child. They both find a man by the name of Ursus, who seems to run kind of a freak show, I guess. That's his whole thing. Despite that kind of job title, he actually is fairly nice. And he kind of just brings Gwenelplaine into the world of this freak show circus type thing. That's where the movie starts. So where do you want to start, Ryan? We have a lot of stuff to talk about, both in story and a lot of stuff around the story itself. And I know you've got some stuff to say on that. So,
well, let's go ahead and begin with the stuff around the story.
Sure.
To kind of set us up and everything. Because, like we've already said, this is a silent film. And we have watched two silent films now. Yeah, we've watched two silent films now. And they both exist in this same bubble, which is awesome. That bubble being German Expressionism. But before we get to German Expressionism, I do have to say something about this film. While this is a silent film, you can't see it, but I'm doing quotation marks, it is actually not so much of a silent film. The reason what I mean by that is this is like one of the first films that actually came in with a built-in soundtrack.
That music we heard.
Yes, it was all purposely built into this movie. And it has a theme actually running throughout. I was looking that up, watching some YouTube videos talking about it. And yeah, it's silent film, but it's like one of the last actual silent films there is.
I was thinking that because of that fact. Yeah, I was thinking if that was the actual music, then that whatever restoration they did on that is pristine. That was really good.
It is the actual music. Now, unlike the last movie we watched that was silent, which was Metropolis.
Metropolis, yeah.
When we watched it, it didn't have original music to it. So there was the same theme that was being played throughout. And that just, it's kind of like a trial and error thing. Unfortunately, that made the experience, at least in my opinion, that made the experience with that a little bit worse. And the only reason why I made it so much worse is because it's the same, even in set in dramatic scenes, it was the same music. So it's
like jazz, and it's not tonally appropriate for what's going on the screen 80% of the time,
But anytime you watch this movie, and this movie right here is in the public domain, so you can actually watch it for free on just about any website. Tubi, YouTube has a couple different people that have uploaded it. The Internet Archives, you can download it yourself and just keep it and things like that. So because it's in public domain, that's the only reason I'm saying that. It has its own built-in music, so it carries throughout. Dramatic parts, it's got dramatic music, and romantic parts, you know how it works. So yeah, I thought that was really a neat thing because like it's technically one of the last ones that were actually made in terms of silent films.
And speaking of like the dramatic parts and the romantic parts in particular, I was not expecting that from this movie. I mean, you see the poster for it, first of all. And Ryan and I both went into this knowing that the man who laughs is kind of one of the inspirations for the DC Marvel character, the villain, the Joker. And you can see that after the fact. It's like, but I didn't know the context in which they were making the comparison. I think I understand it better now, but it did taint my initial approach to it. Is this going to end either tragically or horrifically, or is it, what kind of character is this going to be? Because when you see someone grinning with that kind of, as someone described, like a rictus grin, it's really awful what they've done to him. It's like, it makes you, like the people in the movie, it can be really off-putting, And so you think you don't know exactly where they're going to take it. Now, that said, where they took it was, even though this is a Victor Hugo translation of a Victor Hugo story, it actually had a fairly uplifting ending, which really kind of surprised me. I was worried up until the end that they were going to make sure this was going to be a dark or tragic ending, but it didn't end that way. You know who Victor Hugo is, right? You're familiar with Victor Hugo, right?
Yeah, there's been plenty of his works that I intend to sit down and read.
But are familiar with his output in terms of like, in the general broad strokes, you're familiar with, the two biggest ones most people know are, you have Les Miserables, of course, and you have The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yep.
And the thing that those two have in common, and those are the only ones I have to confess that I've known about before this movie of his works, but it is apparently very endemic of his work that he has a very kind of dour kind of outlook on life, especially in terms of justice for those who are not at the top of society. He's very much analyzing society through that lens of, highborn and lowborn classes and how unfair it is to be part of the lower classes. And you can understand why if you know anything about Victor Hugo. He was born in the last couple of years of Napoleon's reign, and he extended his life all the way through a lot of turmoil in French society that went through several government changes in the span of just his 80 years or so of life. I looked this up. And so you can see where he gets the kind of darker, grittier reality parts of it. He doesn't that is completely absent of hope, but usually at best what you're going to get in one of his endings is this kind of very bittersweet peace. And I think that's about the best way I could put for Les Miserables, how it ends. Because his characters all die. And I was looking at this like, well, the main character didn't die. And then it turns out, guess what? If you look back to the original source, indeed he does. So, but that's the thing is, it's like, of all the things I know about Victor Hugo, this ending, it made the least sense for, I think, the main character to die. So I think they actually did an improvement on the story here.
I would agree, because I know as much as you've told me right now. But I do know this. The only other thing that I really know about Victor Hugo, and this is because I took a quasi French literature class. And when I say quasi, it was French literature, but we didn't directly study books.
Mm-hmm.
We studied like authors and things like that. And if I'm correct, I could be wrong because it's been a while since I've been in this class, like, almost 10 years now. But if I'm correct, one of the things about him is that like he made these monstrous creatures like the Hunchback, Quasimodo. And it was like a portrait of who's really the bad guy. We look at these monsters, quote unquote. We look at these monsters, and they're not the ones that are really the monsters. It's the ones at the top of society, the ones that are hurting the people that are like Quasimodo.
Yeah.
Who's the real monster? This movie does the same exact thing. The story that we're covering, The Man Who Laughs, it does the same exact thing. Who's the real monster? He's supposed to be this monstrous man, but he's not. I mean, he's got a pretty kind heart throughout the whole movie. He has
very self-sacrificing,
and, does everything he can. Like he hides himself. And that's not I'm not saying that's a noble thing by any stretch, but I'm saying he hides himself because he does not want people to see that. Now you could make an argument, he just does that because, that made it easier for them to film. But I mean, from a story sense, it's very clear that like, he's not trying to scare people. And he's not trying to be the monster that that they have made him to be.
And he very much clearly is, he seems to be, especially, and it's revealed through the Dea character, who is the girl that he finds in the snow and ends up growing up with under almost as kind of quasi-siblings, although not related by blood, but they do have a deep affection for each other. And she's blind. And the thing is that he, even though, what's his name, Ursus, I think his name is, his caretaker, so to speak, says, well, you guys can get married. I look forward to you guys getting married. You guys should be considering marriage. And he just feels like he's not worthy of her, and that causes problems. It's not like I was so wanting him not to like go to the other lady because of circumstances that it's like he sees someone who is sighted, who seems to be attracted to him, although it's completely superficial and almost kind of quasi fetishistic, that she has this kind of fetishistic attraction to him. And he realizes that, but it's like, he almost is more attracted to the woman who can see him and kind of look past it, even if it's for bad reasons, than the girl who's always been devoted to him, because he fears, I think, that if she could see him, she'd be like all the others,
Yes. Yeah, that's spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, you don't want to love me because I'm not worthy of love.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you would just hate me if you saw me anyways. And it would be easier to just be with the person who's going to use me, but at least I know what position I take with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. And this is what's so great about the movie. It's not a horror movie, although it has horror elements. This is definitely a romantic film, Even if the original was meant to be more of a tragedy, obviously, this is more of a romantic film. I felt some stuff welling up in my eyes when he finally comes to the realization that Dea is the one he should be with, and he finally lets her touch his face. What he's been avoiding letting her do up in his entire life up to that point. And then they have this moment of realization where it's like, yes, we can be happy with each other. And it broke my heart to see that there's still so much time left in the film, knowing that there's going to be bad things coming. But that's what it really does so well, and I appreciated that so much. But I wasn't expecting that from the movie at all. But yeah, it's a good, really good, solid romance with a really good message at its heart, and in black and without any words too. So yeah.
For those of you that don't know, one of the reasons why it is labeled in that horror movie genre, it's just because of him, the character, the way the character looks and everything. Without the success of this film, we don't actually have all of like the traditional horror movie characters. I think it was wound up being distributed by Universal Pictures, and it springboarded all the other monster movies that are going to come later. Dracula, Frankenstein's monsters,
the Mummy,
the Wolfman, the Mummy. All of those movies are going to be able to get a foothold in, and then, which is going to launch a lot of different things over time, or it's going to push forward cinema. It kind of begins right here with this movie, The Man Who Laughs, and whatnot. So that's kind of why it's called a horror movie. But like when you're watching it, there was not a moment where, like, I know we've said this before, where we talk about older movies, and even if they're scary, or if they're really scary or not, just because of like what we know cinema to be now. But there was never a moment that I felt like uncomfortable watching this movie, even like a hint of like, oh, I could see why people would be uncomfortable, but because it was just so, not a lighthearted movie, obviously, but it was so heartwarming, this character and the characters that loved him and interacted with him, the good characters anyways. It was heartwarming throughout, but that is why it's really built as a horror movie, is because of what comes after it.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I mean, if this was like the first of its kind in cinema, in terms of like showing something that was showing visages that can put people off, in terms of that could potentially be so far outside the norm that you start to be, well, like we did when we saw the poster, right? You don't know what you're in for quite, and when you just see that. And I think they use that in the original posters too. So I can understand how you could get from point A to point B, but it does lead you down a false path, and when you just finally take a look at the film on its own. You think about some of the other movies. I think I've seen the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is another very gothic expressionist. I didn't like that one as much. I have to say that. But you can see where it's like everything that people like nowadays about what's Gothic and kind of dark and a bit macabre, you can trace back to this movement, I think, at least. And maybe there's more to it before that, a different iteration of that before. But in modern times, and I'm saying modern loosely here, as anything 20th century, this movement is kind of like the start of that Gothic style that still is getting expressed. Well, even today, when you think of Tim Burton, for example, he was practically bottle fed in that stuff. It's in all of his work.
I was watching a video on this about German Expressionism. And of course, if you don't know anything about German Expressionism, folks out there, it's a movement. It doesn't last very long. And the reason why it doesn't last very long is because the German film industry winds up collapsing.
This thing
happens.
This thing happens. This in Germany in the early part of the 20th century.
Yeah. But like when it did start collapsing a little bit because of that, it's the catalyst. Hollywood was able to kind of start distributing movies, from Europe, because at first it was actually, I could be getting some stuff wrong here because I'm not looking at things directly right now, but at first, like European movies were being distributed by Germany. So they were coming through Germany, and Germany that's
bad luck.
Yeah. Germany was like just this art house place at one point, which is a wild concept, and you kind of wonder what could have been. And it was a bit cheaper than distributing through Hollywood. Now, Hollywood would get you, that's the Americans. So, that's still a big market. But once all that stuff happened in Germany, what we're talking about, once all that stuff started happening in Germany, America picked up the slack. And unfortunately, that kind of it didn't kill it, but it kind of hurt German Expressionism and everything. But we still see its influences, like we've already said, and whatnot. So it's just a really neat thing to watch how history kind of unfolds, especially when this is one of the last movies and one of the more popular movies of full-on German Expressionism and everything. But you do kind of wonder, like, what could have been if that did not happen with German Expressionism? Like, where does it go? But it is the catalyst for a lot of things. One of the things, because we've seen a lot of movies, or we've talked about a lot of movies and seen them with this movie that we talked about last week, it's a catalyst for the noir film.
Is it really?
Because, yes, it's a catalyst, setting catalyst. It's about where you are. And the thing with noir films always kind of, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time they have this setting of, there's a very, very bleak outlook. You're going to find things like rain, shadows are a big thing in noir films.
Use of light, stark use of lights and darks and shadows. Yeah. So I'm starting to see that, at least stylistically. Yeah.
You see it in this movie that we just watched a little bit too. But that's, that kind of stuff came from German Expressionism and everything. And because of that, we see the influences, but it's just not there like it could have been. Yeah.
Although it's like when it does pop up, and I mentioned Tim Burton, and that's a pretty good way to connect it to the other way that this is relevant to modern audiences, in that it's very specific, but it's like this is often cited as the initial inspiration for the Joker character, which, again, you talk about Batman. Batman, as we've talked about, is noir. Batman is noir. And if you're being influenced by that already, it's like, well, duh. It's like you've got this character who existed in German Expressionism, which, has that slicked back hair. It's not green, but it's like you've got the Joker, who has this, has the fixed grin as is his number one staple, that and you even have the white makeup here too. And you've seen it in multiple iterations. But think about it, the first real serious Batman movie that is not counting the 60s Batman, that's like its own thing, But the first take on Batman that was serious, you could credit that to like Tim Burton, I guess. And in the 80s, it's like, as we said, German Expressionism, big influence on Tim Burton. What do you see when you see Tim Burton's Batman? Is that if you turn it in black and white, it would be a German Expressionist film. If you took away the sound, it would be a German Expression film. It would be. Absolutely.
Yeah. You see the influences in some of the movies today, like you've already said, but you can even see it in the newest one, the most recent Batman movie. That influence is very much still there. Anytime you really mess with Gotham will have something like that. Now, a movie that did just come out that harkens back to this German Expressionism, to this things that we're talking about, Robert Eggers' Nosferatu.
Yeah, that would do it.
The original Nosferatu, again, the original Nosferatu did the same exact thing because that was built off the back of German Expressionism and everything.
So, verdict time. I'm going to go this time. This for me is a trust me film. It defies any sort of simplistic categorization that way. It's a deeply touching romance inside of a horror-ish type gothic film with some inspiring and hopeful elements that I wasn't expecting. It may not be everyone's cup of tea. Silent films tend to be that way, but it's a solid entry from a silent film era, and I think it's worthy of, just for the performances alone, really, especially the leads. How about you, man?
Trust me with a hint of belongs in a museum. And the reason why I say that is because at the end of the day, it takes a lot for me to sit down and watch a silent film. So that's kind of one of the reasons. Two, kind of the same thing with like the whole horror element. It's not a horror movie. It is billed as one, but it's not a horror element. Let it be a launch point for you studying things like Victor Hugo or German Expressionism or just and where that all takes us and everything. But at the end of the day, I'll probably only watch it maybe 1-2 other times in my life and then just, be thankful that I did.
Yeah.
but go watch it.
That's legitimate. That's legitimate. Yeah, I love a film that can take your train of thought in so many different directions and they're all equally valid. So it's a rare one that does that. So yeah. Anyway, now's the time when Ryan and I would like to remind the listening audience out there that if you're watching these movies alongside us, and you should be, and hearing our reactions, please do like, subscribe, comment, and of course, follow us on your podcast purveyor of choice. Tell us if you think we got it all wrong, because, maybe we got it wrong, This is all opinion stuff. And also tell us some of the films you'd like us to see do, especially if they're available for free, because this adventure comes with no strings attached, guaranteed. In any case, Ryan and I thank you for sticking with us on this shared journey. And we didn't get to talk about this beforehand. I just kind of picked it off our list at random. But you want to tell us about the stuff? I wrote it down for you there.
Yeah, I saw it. Next week's movie is Hobson's Choice, starring Charles Laughton and directed by David Lean, potentially of Lawrence of Arabia fame. Tubi says widower Henry Hobson is a successful bootmaker and a tyrannical father of 3 daughters who all want to leave him by getting married. I've seen this movie actually floating around from time to time, so I'm looking forward to it.
It's been a staple on Tubi for a while, so finally getting around to it. Yeah. Anyway, that's the movie we're looking forward to next week. And until then, I guess there's nothing else to talk about. So I guess, Ryan, I'll see you next week. And folks, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
All right, folks. Bye-bye.